Welcome. This is Ask the Experts here on Talk Radio 1190. Final show of the day. Of course, we do this every weekend, folks. 10 to 12 every Saturday. Always great to be in here. Well, what do we do on the show? We interview local prominent professionals here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. On what? Well, their area of expertise, of course. I'm the host of the show, Matt Cather. Joining me on today's show, in studio even better, Lori Vann of Lori Vann with Vann and Associates. So real quick, before we get to Lori, you can find them online at vannassociates.com. And it's two N's, VANN associates.com. And a little bit about Lori. Lori is a coaching, counseling, and consulting and is proud to be chosen by the Ask the Experts. Of course, we're glad to have her here. But not only in the DFW area, but internationally as well. With over 20 years of clinical counseling experience, she is also the author of 5 books and the founder of the Institute of Non-Suicidal Self-Injury. Very excited. She's been on multiple programs, televised and on national radio, and is a commentator for the international podcasts throughout. That's fantastic. I know I kind of set the bar high to start things off, or maybe you did yourself, Lori. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here today.
Well, I'm excited to have you in studio. More importantly, it's great to be here. This is your first time being on Ask the Experts. So because of that, which is exciting in itself, why don't you, and I gave him a little introduction as well, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're all about?
Well, as you did mention, I have over 20 years of clinical counseling experience. I've worked inpatient psych, outpatient nonprofit, and have been full-time in my own private practice since 2008. Vann and Associates Coaching, Counseling, Consulting in Lewisville, Texas. And I have several counselors there at the practice. We do take insurance. And in addition to all of those features, also a professional international speaker and also international media commentator. And throughout the years, have had a variety of experiences, therapeutically speaking, of working with depression, anxiety. My areas of expertise are in that perfectionism world, and in particular, non-suicidal self-injury, where I'm regarded as an authority on that for all of the research and all of the information I've provided over the decades, and led to the founding of the Institute for NSSI.
Well, that is fantastic. And I tell you what, we're going to dive right into things and really just have a little conversation today in regards to that. Now, I know COVID was crazy for all of us. It really was. But did you see, did it impact addiction rates? How did things go for you, and what did you see throughout that?
Yes, absolutely. COVID, the lockdowns had a significant impact on addiction of all types. So, and with addiction, a lot of times we think just in the alcohol and drug world, but as we'll go through later today, we're going to talk about a lot of other types of addictions that are out there. But we know from the CDC, some of their stats they found, there's at least a 13% increase in substance use of either starting for the first time or just the increase in it. I know my friends in the treatment community, and talking with them, they didn't have beds available because so many people were going into recovery treatment centers. And unfortunately, we did see over 100,000 overdoses that happened during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was a real talking point throughout, and I know it was a national thing. It made a lot of news. But the one thing, I guess before we get too into it, let's be simple about it. Let's define addiction. What does that really mean?
Well, for addiction, I look at it on a physiological and psychological perspective. So in a physiological sense, we know that addiction alters the chemicals in the brain. It activates those pleasure centers, and so we crave it. And when we don't have that in particular substance in our system, we think about it, we crave it, we might go through withdrawals. And that's one of the key things with defining addiction is the withdrawal piece of it. And that could be physiological withdrawals, shakes, sweats, nausea, vomiting, and psychologically, what we call that jonesing effect of you just can't stop thinking about it and can just feel that physical discomfort. Psychologically speaking with addictions, and that's a little bit more in the world I work with, sometimes what they call process addictions, is that to me it's almost in the obsessive compulsive side of it, is that you're thinking about it. You're thinking about how am I going to do it? And maybe you're collecting whatever goes along with that particular addiction. Like in self-injury, it might be, okay, I'm thinking about when I'm going to injure when I get home. So I'm thinking about the tools that I'm going to use and maybe the Band-Aids and how I'm going to cover it up and where I'm going to do it on my body. And so, there's a lot of more clinical ways to define it. But the thing I want to drive home is that if you feel you can't live your life without something, that's a sign. When you don't have access to something, it affects your mood, it affects your priorities. That's a sign. So that's a really simplistic way of putting it.
And can really cause a burden for you, of course. I know this implies to me as well, because when I do hear the word addiction, we all, or at least most of us, tend to think just about alcohol or drug use. But there's other types of addictions out there, correct?
Yes, there are actually so many, and that's why I'm really glad for this opportunity to help educate the community, because there are some things we just don't readily think about that we really do need to start taking a different look at. So, for example, gambling addiction. Well, you drive north a little bit and you have casinos. But the thing is that we have gambling in Texas with the lottery. I worked a gambling helpline decades ago, really, and just hearing the stories of people that lost their life savings, that were on the verge of attempting suicide, that had lost their families because of the gambling. We're a big sports community in Dallas-Fort Worth, so doing a lot of the betting on the sports. Pornography is an addiction, and that one is a really insidious one because it starts off with just maybe a look-see here, look-see there, and then at some point, as with all addictions, you build this tolerance so that what you're looking at doesn't really do it for you, so you have to keep upping the ante to get more of that pleasure, and that's where potentially you go into things that are on the legal side of pornography. And internet addiction. We are addicted to technology. We're addicted to the internet. We're addicted to gaming.
Yes.
For a lot of people. And it's all the same thing. It's activating those pleasure centers. We crave it. We think it. I've seen it firsthand in individuals in my office. I've seen it early onset when I was even in college in the 90s of a friend that was sort of acting out the video game that he was just totally addicted to. And then I do make the case that self-injury and eating disorders really should be looked at in the addiction category. And then we have things like shopping addiction. If you're spending most of your day on the home shopping network and the UPS driver knows your name personally, that might be a sign. So there's so many different forms of it.
And I think the gambling and pornography is really important examples because they're so readily available to you and so easy to access. And I think that just takes it to a next level, kind of. Now, co-occurring addiction, explain that for us.
It's a term that's used definitely in the mental health world. And if you go into treatment at a hospital, they'll say there's a dual diagnosis unit or co-occurring addictions. And so there's a couple of different ways that I've seen it, is that it's an addiction, but you also have another diagnosis such as depression or anxiety disorder or PTSD. And wow, the correlation with PTSD and substance use is really something else. And that really drives home the importance of us having programs for our veterans, because sometimes that's how they deal with their PTSD is through substance use. But you can also look at co-occurring as one of those behavioral addictions, such as gambling and porn and substance. So again, working at the gambling hotline, I would see alcohol and gambling both happen. Or sometimes, and this was a really great phrase a colleague of mine had used, he's like, same monster but different clothes. And so often I would see individuals that maybe they were no longer drinking or using other substances, but then they moved into gambling because they never dealt with the core issue that was driving the behaviors, that was driving that thought process in the first place.
Yeah, and I'm really appreciate you bringing up the PTSD. I'm a former veteran myself. I know how prevalent alcohol abuse and drug abuse is in the veteran community. It really just hits home. So we appreciate you for that 100%. Now, I think one thing that a lot of people are curious about, myself included, are addictions genetic? What happens in that situation? Explain that for us.
We know on the alcohol side that there is a genetic piece to it. But for some of the other addictions, such as, porn or internet and, sex addiction, shopping and all that, we don't have the DNA on it. With addiction, there's a piece of nature and nurture. So are there some that may be more predisposed to certain types of addictions? Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is something there in the genetics. However, it is really important to note that our environment, I would say, has an even bigger influence on it. That how we learn to cope with life. Well, our parents are the first role models of that. And so if you see mom or dad or grandparents or whomever go to the bar or go to, the alcohol or whatever substance or other avoidance behavior as their way to cope each day they come back from work, well, guess what's role modeled for the child? They go, oh, okay, so when I don't want to deal with my feelings, then I can just drink them away, or I can just pop a pill, or I can just, escape for the next 5 hours on the internet, and then I don't have to deal with life. So environment is definitely a piece of it, and we have to look at the media influence too, because let's look at how many ads are out there for alcohol companies, or on social media, how many ads, push this avoidance behavior or that one. People are really impressionable, and what seems like just an innocent, oh, well, it's just this rationale, it becomes a very slippery slope leading into, okay, but that's now my go-to for everything. And now you have the habit part.
Not to mention the pharmaceuticals that you see on advertising all the time. I mean, that kind of just rolls right into it as well.
Oh, yeah. I could discuss a lot about the pharmaceutical industry and their level of responsibility for the opiate problems and the overdoses and just, the messaging from the pharmaceutical industry.
I guess in the environment, to put it for simpler terms, are you essentially saying it kind of normalizes that behavior to a certain degree?
It does. You go with what you know. And if you're only role modeled certain things, and this is going beyond the realm of addiction too, we can say this for anger management.
Yes.
If you have a parent that always loses their stuff and yells and screams, guess what's role model for the kid? They go, oh, that's normal. And if you want to take it into domestic violence, we absolutely know the impact of domestic violence on a child, that they're either going to go along that same path and be a perpetrator themselves, or they become a victim. Unless there's some intervention in between where the kid learns that, hey, this isn't healthy, this isn't right to treat people that way, or, hey, you have rights, you don't have to allow yourself to be treated that way, then, again, you go with what you know. And that really becomes that generational trauma.
This is Ask the Experts here on Talk Radio 1190. We got Lori Vann in studio today. Great to have her in, of Vann and Associates. 972-315-5000 5052 is the number. It's 972-315-5052 is the number. VannAssociates.com, and that's two N's, VANN, Associates.com. Now, Lori, I want to get right back into it. And, we were kind of talking, of course, about addiction and the environment and how that plays out. But one thing I really wanted to cover is, this can, not only do you deal with this with yourself, but this can impact somebody's performance, whether it's their jobs, their family. How does, what should they do if they're in that situation? How does that all play out really, and how it affects everybody?
Yeah, the thing with addiction is the person that's struggling with it often doesn't realize the extent of the impact it has on those around them. That's part of the denial piece, unfortunately. And then for the family members that are involved, obviously they might be emotionally abused. If they try to intervene, they're yelled at, they're screamed at. Maybe there's some gaslighting that's going on. The person isn't there sometimes physically, and sometimes they're there physically, but nobody's home kind of deal, that the person is missing out on their kid's life. They're not being a good partner. And that creates additional stress. You have the financial impact of addictions. It costs money to do these things. If you've got a shopping addiction, yeah, obviously, that's going to add up the credit card bills. But for using alcohol, drugs, that costs money. Well, that's money that could go to maybe planning for college, or money to help get out of other types of debt, or to help buy a house. And as I had previously mentioned, I've seen people where they actually lost their homes and they lost their families because of their addictions. But you also have what we call that generational trauma of that go with what you know. And so then what are you setting up the next generation for? And unfortunately, we do see that. I have seen it so often in the office where if there's a client that comes in and it's them and their sibling and they both came from a family of addiction, one of them almost invariably goes down the same path of use or addiction, and the other one just goes the exact opposite and says, I've seen the damage, I've seen the carnage, no thank you, steering clear. But, job-wise, I mean, obviously people are not fully there if they're under the influence, and there's so many statistics that go with that. You have workplace injuries because someone's under the influence. You have poor performance. They make mistakes. That costs the job money. You maybe have some resentment from your coworkers because you take off work a lot, and a lot of times they know what's going on. So, I mean, that's just a little bit of the impact.
Now, I want to get into the counselor aspect of things, but before that, I really want to bring up, treatment centers. We've seen them popping up all over the place. I think the main takeaway and the main question is, how do you find a reputable one that is really there for the best interests of yourself, and what are the different types or levels of treatment as well?
So you have inpatient, where you're actually spending the night at the hospital for a varied amount of time. And sometimes, depending on the level of treatment needed, you might have to go residential treatment, which means you might be there for, say, a month or longer. Now, once you've moved out of the RTC for short or inpatient, you may go into a PHP program, which is partial hospitalization program, and then step down to IOP, which is intensive outpatient program. And those are varying lengths too. So with a PHP, you go there Monday through Friday for, say, like 6 hours out of the day, but you're spending the night in your own bed. And IOP could be 3 times a week. It could be 5 times a week. It's usually about 3 or 4 hours. And it's the same thing that you're going on with your life. You just go there to get that additional level of treatment. But how do you find a reputable one? And that's such a good question, because there are a lot that pop up. I've seen that in the domestic violence space, and I've seen it in the substance space too. So you want to find out, one, are these run by actually fully licensed individuals? Are these people that have actual training, that they have a level of accountability with the state of Texas? And if someone has a license, they have accountability to Texas. And then have they been approved by the state of Texas? There's different protocol you have to go through to get that stamp of approval. And then there's even a higher level that we look at, like JCO and other certifications that say, hey, on a national level, we recognize you guys are doing your stuff. And preferably it'd be supervised by a medical doctor, because if someone is going through withdrawals or someone is on medications for, say, depression or anxiety or sleep, you want to know that there is an actual psychiatrist that is monitoring the situation. And you need to ask what their protocol is. What is it founded on? So one of the gripes I've had with some treatment centers is that they'd never get to the real core issue of why did someone begin this process to start with. It's not that one day they woke up and go, oh, it's Tuesday. I think I'm going to start abusing cocaine. That's not how it works. Usually it was, I'm stressed out, and it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and it's unresolved stuff from maybe my childhood. And it sort of leads into the use of some type of addiction. But if you only focus solely on the addiction itself and you never get to the root cause, you're going to play whack-a-mole, and you're just going to keep going from one behavior to the next, and we have absolutely seen that take place.
Lori, we're coming up towards the end of the show. We got about 2 minutes or so left. I want to make it quick, but an important thing I want to get across is, counselors sometimes get a bad rap as people just want to go in the field, figure out their own stuff, or avoid dealing with stuff by trying to help others. How do you feel about those comments and stereotypes?
I think in every field you have those that maybe shouldn't be practicing in it. Listening into some of the licensing board meetings, yeah, most definitely. I agree. There are some people that fit that stereotype. However, there are a whole lot more that are healthy, that are emotionally safe, that are in it for the right reasons. And what I would encourage individuals to do is interview a potential counselor. Ask them questions. See how they respond to it. Do your research. Do the due diligence. And I'm glad to be a resource for that, and the counselors with me at Vann Associates. And, if you're wanting to find out more information, please go to the website, vannassociates.com. If you go, maybe I need more coaching versus counseling, hey, I do the coaching part. And I'm glad for anyone that listened today to do a free 15-minute coaching consult with you to see if it's a right fit.
And, it's a pleasure having you in studio today. I look forward to hopefully doing it here soon, very soon again. And one more time, folks, it is vannassociates.com. And I'll make sure we say it's two N's, VANN, associates.com, 972-315-5052. It's 972-315-5052. And you heard her. Reach out. She's more than happy to talk to you and have a little conversation. Lori, until next time, thank you so much for joining us on Ask the Experts. And folks, you know it. We do this every week, same time, 10 to 12 on Saturdays. We'll do it again same time next week, folks. Have a great weekend.